explain the American drama film called The Only Living Boy in New York from 2017. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care, and I hope you enjoy it. In the start of the movie, we see a boy named Thomas, who along with his friend Mimi has come to an art exhibit. Tom wants to become a writer, and that's why he's struggling, because not everyone who writes gets the position they want in this world. Even though his family's rich and they own a publishing company, but he doesn't want to take any help from them. Thomas really likes Mimi a lot, but Mimi already has a boyfriend. Then we get to know that they both slept together once. That night was very special and beautiful for Thomas. Mimi tells Thomas that she has to go to another city because she really wants to go to an art exhibit. Thomas, after hearing this, feels very sad because he really loves her, and she's the only constant thing in his life. He tells this to Mimi many times, but she says what's between them, they're not sure what it is, and she has a boyfriend. Then Thomas says that the night that they spent together was very special, and it meant a lot for him, but Mimi doesn't think the same thing. She says to Thomas, that night we were drunk, and we were high on drugs, so whatever happened between us doesn't mean anything, and that she's already forgotten about it, like it was a mistake of some kind. Thomas really gets hurt because of this, and because he really loved her a lot, and with everything he had. Mimi always treats Thomas this way, and doesn't really care for his feelings, and also she doesn't take him seriously. Thomas again confesses his feelings to her, and tells her that he doesn't want to just be a friend, and he wants so much more, but she always rejects him, and this time as well. But Thomas tells her that he can't be with her as a friend because his feelings will always be there, and he won't be able to bear it. Mimi gets sad a bit, and we see Thomas leaves from there with a heavy heart. He gets depressed, and while walking back home, he meets a man, who after seeing him, comes close to him and asks what's wrong. Are you depressed because of a girl? What's her name? Thomas feels very awkward, but finally tells him that her name is Mimi. The strange man asks him about her, and maybe he'll be able to help. Thomas ignores his words and goes back to his room. The man's name was Gerald, but Thomas won't find this out until a little bit later. Thomas, after coming back to his room, starts thinking about his words, and after a while, he goes back to him and tells him the whole situation and the things that have happened. Gerald tells him that you're still young, and this age is really a suspicious age. You should move away from her, and if she really has any feelings for you, she'll come back to you. But Thomas was not able to understand his words, and he gets up and goes back to his room. Then we see that Thomas is having dinner with his family, although he doesn't like to be around his father, but because his mother insisted, he finally agrees to do so. His mother's name is Judith, and she's a very sensitive and loving person. For Judith, family means everything, and if ever they fall apart, she won't bear it, and it could be fatal because she has many diseases, along with some mental issues. His father's name is Ethan, and Thomas really hates his father, because of which he had decided to live alone, even after being from a rich family. His father also doesn't like him. His son always stays away from him and lives alone, and is still struggling so much because all of these riches and his company's bank balance belong to him, but he doesn't want anything, and he doesn't allow him to help his son. Then we see that one day Thomas goes to a show with Mimi, where he sees Ethan with another woman. This woman is also one of the main characters of the movie. Her name is Johanna. She really hates commitments and wants to live her life like the way she wants to. Thomas, after seeing this, gets very disturbed, and he starts to worry about his mother, because if she finds out about this, she won't be able to bear it, and it might cause real harm to her mental and physical health. One day, Thomas was having lunch with Ethan, and he really wanted to confront him about the matter of Johanna, but he doesn't say anything and keeps quiet. Then we get to know, because of his dream of becoming a writer, he's given up on his college studies. Ethan really hates this, and he tells him that he knows a career counselor, and he'll get an appointment for him, and you should go and meet him. He'll help you in your career as a writer, and will also guide you. Thomas finds it strange, and thinks, why is he doing this? Then at night, Thomas and Gerald start to drink, and after getting drunk, Gerald asks him what he wants from this life. Thomas didn't know what he was supposed to answer, because he wants to be a writer, but in the past he told Ethan about it and showed him his work, on which Ethan said that it was ordinary, and had nothing eye-catching or different. Then we get to know that when Ethan was young, he also wanted to be a writer, but he wasn't so talented, and so he started a business of publishing, which ended up turning out great for him. In the next scene, we see that Thomas goes to Ethan's office, where he sees Johanna coming out of his office. He starts to follow her, and after a few days of chasing, he finally one day stops her, and Johanna says that she knows who Thomas is, and invites him to lunch. Thomas agrees, and during lunch, he says to her, "How long have you and Ethan been together? He's a married man and he'll never leave my mom. You don't have any future in this, and you should stop." Johanna says to him, "You don't know about the relationship of your mother and father, even though they're together, but there's a huge distance between them. Sometimes things are not how they seem. Like now, you've come here to ask about all this, but in your heart, you want to have an intimate relationship with me." Thomas finds this very strange, and in anger, he gets up and says that it's not like that, and he leaves from there. In the next scene, we see that Thomas is with his mother, and she tells him that he's the start in her life, and she loves him more than anything in this world. Thomas really wants to tell her everything, but he stays silent because of her conditions. The next day, Thomas goes back to Johanna and tells her that there's nothing in his heart like she thinks, and tells her to stop meeting with his father. Johanna, who hates commitments, is really disturbed because Ethan has proposed to her recently and told her that he wants to marry her. Then after saying this, Thomas leaves and meets with Gerald. He tells him everything about Johanna, to which Gerald asks him, "Do you like her?" Thomas denies, but after Gerald kept on insisting, he admits it. Then we see that Ethan has given a party at his house and has invited Thomas as well. As Thomas goes there, he sees Johanna there, who is with another millionaire man. He goes to her and says he wants to talk. After going out, he says, "How much money has that new man paid you for tonight?" On listening to which, Johanna really gets angry, and they both start to fight. While fighting, they both stop for a few moments, and then they both kiss each other. Then they both leave the house and go back to Thomas's house, and they sleep together. Then we see that one day Thomas shows his writings to Gerald, and as he reads it, he tells Thomas that it's amazing. "You have great potential and can become a good writer." Thomas tells him that he's starting to fall in love with Johanna, to which Gerald tells him that sometimes what we think is love, in reality it's completely something else, and our hearts are not always in the right place. The next day, Ethan calls Thomas to his office. Thomas thinks that maybe the night he spent with Johanna has finally been realized by Ethan, and that's why he's called him. He finally makes up his mind and goes to Ethan's office, where Ethan says to him, "Are you hiding from me? You had an appointment with the career counselor. Why didn't you go there to meet him?" Thomas says that it was my fault and I'm sorry, but you don't have to worry, I'll manage my own way. Then we see that Thomas comes back home, where he sees Gerald is not in his room, and in his room Thomas finds a book. Now Thomas finds out Gerald's name, and after researching, he finds out that Gerald is a very famous and talented writer, who has written 12 books so far, and now he's writing a book on Thomas, and he becomes very happy after finding this. He's really proud that such a big writer has praised his work, and has said that it was amazing. The next day we see that while Thomas was with Mimi, he sees that Johanna is still meeting with Ethan, and Mimi, after seeing Johanna, asks Thomas if there's something going on between them. She had noticed that both of them suddenly left the party at the same time the other day, but then she herself answers, "Nah, you're not like this, I know that." Then we see that at night, Thomas says to Johanna that she should leave Ethan. Johanna, who was really disturbed at the time because she cared for both Ethan and Thomas, after thinking for a while, decides to break up with both of them. Thomas hears Johanna, who is fighting with Ethan, on the phone, and he thinks that she's finally broken up with him. Then after a few days, we see that Ethan has given another party at his house, and this time Thomas invites Gerald too, and Gerald comes. Thomas shows him Mimi from afar, who is standing next to Judith, and then Gerald says to Thomas that your mother is very beautiful. Then we see Johanna, who is standing on the roof alone. Gerald comes there and goes to her, and says to her that I know what you're doing, and if you hurt Thomas in all this, you'll have to answer to me, and I won't let you go easily. Johanna gets really uncomfortable and decides to leave the party. On the way out, she was stopped by Thomas, but now she breaks up with him and tells him that his father has proposed to her, and now doing all this would not be good. Then she leaves. Thomas thinks that she and Ethan will marry each other, and he gets angry. In his anger, he goes to his mother and wants to tell her everything, but after seeing Ethan and his mother having a good time, and seeing his mother so happy, he decides to stay quiet and doesn't ruin their moment. He then leaves. Mimi, after seeing this, follows him, because nowadays Thomas stays away from her, and she really misses him, and feels sad about what she did to him, so she breaks up with her boyfriend. She tells all this to Thomas, but now what Thomas tells her turns her life upside down. He tells her everything about Johanna, and she gets really sad and disturbed, so she leaves from there. Then she didn't love him, but now he doesn't love her. Then we see that Thomas decides to stay the night in his mother's house, and he tries to sleep, but can't. But after some time he falls asleep, And the next day we see that he was sitting alone and was looking very disturbed because he was so depressed and sad because of how Johanna broke up with him. And now Mimi also loves him and came to him, but now he doesn't love her, and he doesn't want to hurt her also. Now he remembers Gerald's words, and he knows what he meant. Whatever he said was true. The thing he felt for Johanna was not love, and Mimi also came back to him. Thomas really gets depressed, and while he's thinking, we see Judith comes there, and she asks him what's wrong, to which he replies that he really wants to say something, but he can also run from it, because it could just make problems. She tells him that sometimes it's better to face the problem, and even if you run, you have to face it one day. Thomas gets up and goes to Ethan's room and tells him about everything that has happened between Johanna and him. Ethan gets very angry and says, "Do you know how much I've done for you? And this is how you repay me?" He could have hit Thomas because of what he did, but he goes out while crying because he really loved Johanna a lot, and this thing has broken him to his core. And Judith, who came behind Thomas, says to him that you don't know how much Ethan has done for you. Then she shows him a picture of his childhood, where he sees Gerald too. Then she tells him that Ethan, Gerald, and Judith were all good friends, and when Ethan and she got married, she was not able to give birth because Ethan had some medical problems, because of which they can't become parents. So they decided that they would get help from someone else, and they both knew and liked Gerald very much. That's why they asked for his help. Gerald and Judith had a one-night stand. She also tells him that it was the best of her life, and that Thomas was the son of Gerald. Judith and Gerald both started to grow feelings for each other, but to give you a good life, he went away, and Ethan, even after knowing everything, still he did everything he could to give you this life. Although there was no love in between Ethan and Judith, but he still stayed here because he wanted to take care of Thomas, and he wanted to treat and love him like his own son. Thomas is heartbroken and ashamed of what he did to such a great man. He always avoided and hated him, but he always loved him and he gave him such a good life. Then Thomas leaves with a heavy heart and a cloud of sadness surrounding his heart. Now we see that he goes back home where he reads Gerald's book, in which he's written that he used to visit him in his childhood, and those moments were the best moments of his life. Now that Thomas has grown into a young boy, he's come back to meet him, and he wanted to encourage him for his talent as a writer. After meeting and discussing everything with Gerald, Thomas is very happy because he knows that his talent of writing comes from his father, and he goes back home and explains everything to his mother. Then she asks about Gerald because Judith still loves him a lot. The movie jumps forward, and after 1 year we see that Thomas has finally published his first book, and Ethan has come to meet him, and after clearing up everything, their relationship grows stronger, and now he sees Ethan as his father, and Johanna, who also loved Ethan a lot, has finally married him, and they're living happily together. Then we see that Gerald has also published his book about Thomas, and after 20 years, he meets with Judith, and now they're also living very happily together.